Hey, thanks for watching this video. I've watched a lot of internet videos with guys installing coilovers on their RSX, getting pumped about the ride height, taking a few pulls, and then telling me how great the new ride is. Well, this isn't one of those videos. Without any real customization experience, and just the information that I could pull off the internet, I installed Raceland Coilovers on my 2002 RSX Type S back in June of 2019. I'm not ashamed to say that it's been a real pain in my ass. In fact, it's kind of frustrating feeling like you're the only guy driving around an RSX with coilovers and you can't get rid of all the issues. Well, it turns out that I'm a perfectionist and I don't give up very easily. I'm determined to get my humble setup working to my satisfaction, and I'm going to share my experiences here in case there's somebody else out there with the same kind of experiences that I might be able to help. I don't have a lot of photos and videos from my early work. I just wasn't planning on doing this back then. But I think with the content that I can put together today and the photos and videos that I did take, I can put together something pretty useful. So, enough said. Let's dive in. Here's a pic of one of the front coilovers after my first installation. And here's a shot of one of the rear coilovers. Looks just fine, right? And here's a picture of the car after all 4 coilovers have been installed. I thought it looked pretty damn good. Well, it didn't sound good. I had some pretty severe spring bind clunking going on. And I didn't know what that was. So when I took the car to get the alignment done, I asked the guys in the shop about it. They told me that was pretty normal for coilovers. Well, if that's normal, I might regret my decision to put coilovers on my car. I started working from home about the same time I started working on the suspension, so I wasn't driving the car a lot, and that turned out to be a good thing because I really botched that first install. For a little context to help you understand how I messed up, check out this unboxing vid I put together. I'm so excited. My new coilovers came yesterday. I took them out of the box and I watched the installation video. So now I wanted to talk about what I found in the box and some things that I'm still not very sure about. This is the driver's side front coilover. Has this top nut, and the spring is just sitting on here. And then there's this dust boot that'll keep debris and dirt, stuff like that, off of this part of the coilover when I'm driving. Inside the dust boot you can see there's a bump stop, and that is going to help protect the coilover when things get bumpy on the road. If I put it all back together, you can see that there's something missing here. According to the installation video, I'll need some parts that are on my car to install these coilovers. I think the part's called the top mount. I chose these coilovers because they seem pretty simple. There's really only one adjustment, and that's that this collar right here. When I turn the collar one way, it's going to increase the ride height. And when I turn the collar the other way, it's going to decrease the ride height. And then you have this final collar down here, so that once you have the ride height you want, you can use this collar to lock the whole thing in place. I also found these 2 rings in the box. Well, there were 2 of each. According to the installation video, I need something like this to sit between the spring and the top mount, the part that I have to take out of the car. But tell if the ring was two pieces, and it was a different color, so I'm not really sure how these are supposed to go. I'm guessing it's going to go something like this. You may have guessed that putting those two rings in there was my first big mistake, and you'd be right. But before we get into that, let's talk about what you'll see when you first remove the struts from your car getting ready to install the coilovers. The stock struts don't look all that different from a coilover. They're generally a little fatter, the spring's a little wider in diameter, but they're still a spring over a piston or a damper. So they have a very similar appearance. Well, when you pull that strut off of your car, the top mount is going to be attached to the strut. And it will look something like this. Okay, this is not an OEM top mount, but this is very similar to the OEM top mount that I pulled out of my car. The other thing that comes with, that you'll find with this top mount, is something like this. Okay, it has this ring that sits over that little bulge on the top mount. So this ring is part of the top mount, and when you take that top mount off of your strut, you'll get this piece and you'll have that ring in there. Now that spring is under pressure. It's compressed with this top hat. So you want to be careful when you pull that off of there and put some spring compressors on that spring to hold it, to reduce the pressure on the top mount before you take that top nut off. I've seen people do it without doing that, but it seems a little dangerous. Like you could maybe get hit in the teeth with it or something like that when the top nut finally breaks loose. So I wanted to review that before I got into the mistakes I made, because this ring becomes a part of my confusion as I was going through this, and so I felt like it was important to make sure you knew where this, that this ring came from your stock mounts, or that it came from my stock mounts, and when I talk about it in subsequent parts of this video, you won't be confused about where this came from, and which hopefully will keep you from being confused about it when you do the install like I was. Well, you should remember that I was trying to figure out what to do with these two rings that came out of the Raceland kit. I figured I needed both of them to install the coilovers, and now after taking the struts out of my car and removing the top mounts, I had this additional ring. So I had three that I needed to put together. Well, this one was pretty clear that it needed to go up against the top mount, and it fit on here pretty well. So I was pretty confident in that bit. But this one was a little harder to deal with. It wouldn't fit like that, because those two holes are about the same size. And I couldn't put it up here because even though that looks the best, this I knew needed to go up against the top mount. So my best guess as to what I did was I had that one on the spring, which makes sense because the spring will fit on that well. And then I put this one onto there. And then of course I had that between this ring and the top mount. So that's my best guess as to what I did with that first install. But man, look at this. That's a lot of play. It's no wonder things weren't working. So I reached out to Raceland, and the first thing they asked me is if I used both of the rings that came with the kit when I installed the coilovers. I guess I'm not the first one to make that mistake. They proceeded to explain to me that there were two types of top mounts made for the RSX, and that the two rings, which are called top hats, were intended for use for either type of top mount. So They asked me a bunch of questions and eventually figured out which top mount I was using, and then told me that I should be using this ring. So I reinstalled the coilovers using this ring and this plastic ring that came out of my car. I think this was actually the first time I actually had the top hat, bearing ring, top mount arrangement correct, but I was still getting a lot of spring bind clunk. So I reached out to Raceland again. So this time they told me that when spring bind clunk is involved, it's usually the top mounts that are the problem, and they recommended that I replace mine. So I did, with theirs. Raceland sells top mounts for the RSX, and they look like this. The difference was a bit of a surprise, but I figured Raceland makes the coilovers, Raceland makes the top mounts, so the combination is probably the best bet for a good setup. So I reinstalled the coilovers with the Raceland top mounts. Third time's the charm. Seemed to be. I still had some noises in the front suspension, but you know, the rest of the components are almost 20 years old, and the new struts are a lot stiffer than the old struts were, so it's probably to be expected, and I figured all of that could be a problem for another day. So I drove the car for almost a year before I found this. Those top nuts were in the middle when I first installed the coilovers. Now they were not. It seemed a little concerning to me, so I called up Raceland and I sent them these pictures, and they seemed to concur. So I sent them this picture. Notice I have the spring, then I have the top hat that they told me to use, then I have this funny ring that sits between the top hat and the top mount, and then I have the Raceland top mount. Well, it turns out, once again, I really wasn't understanding. You remember, I showed you these two different styles of top mounts. This was the one that was on my car originally, and this is the one I bought from Raceland. So, you remember this guy that Raceland told me I should be using? Well, they told me I should be using it with this top mount. They didn't tell me I should be using it with this top mount. Remember from the unboxing that there was another top hat. It's in my car right now, so I'll use this picture to show you what it looks like. But that's the top hat that you want to use with this style of top mount. And you don't want to use this. Turns out this is a bearing ring. And it sits on here, and that bearing ring helps the spring and this top hat to slide around. This top mount has its bearing ring inside this cup. So that's right, I had two bearing rings in my setup. No wonder things were going wrong. I'd like to take a sidebar now and discuss another source of confusion for me. When I received my Raceland kit, there was an insulator installed on one of the top hats. I believe it was this one. The insulator fits pretty snugly on the spring side of the top hat, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you might not even know it's there. When I received my kit, I thought the insulator was just part of the top hat that it was installed on. Let's revisit the last picture that I showed you that I sent to Raceland. When looking at this picture, the Raceland support technician that I was talking to mistook the bearing ring for the insulator. That's understandable, since I really shouldn't have been using that plastic bearing ring with these top mounts. As you can imagine, some fairly confused conversation took place as I was trying to reconcile the things the technician was saying about the insulator while looking at the bearing ring. Eventually I figured out that the insulator was a separate part, and everything started to make more sense. I'm not totally sure what the purpose of the insulator is. I suspect it's just to eliminate metal-on-metal contact. The important thing is that once you determine which type of top mount you're going to use, and therefore which top hat you're going to use, you want to make sure that that insulator is installed on the correct top hat. Now that we've talked about the insulator, let's go back and find out what the consequences were of my latest failure to understand. Well, this fabulous setup ruined my top mounts. So I got some new Raceland top mounts, and I reinstalled the coilovers using those and the correct top hats and gave it another go. And wouldn't you know it, I was still having issues. This time I didn't have so much spring bind clunk. Instead, every time I turn the wheel, the whole suspension groans. Turn it to the left, groan, groan, groan. Turn it to the right, groan, groan, groan. So, pull it off again, take a look, and see if I can see what's going on. And this is what I found. This is the underside of one of my Raceland top mounts. Notice that scoring around the center hole? Here's the top mount from the other side of the car. The scoring here is even worse. What was happening was that this part of the coilover damper center shaft was making contact with the underside of the top mount. And as the coilover would rotate, the center shaft would rub on the top mount, rubbing off the paint and producing the groaning noise. The problem was that I simply wasn't getting the top nut fastened tight enough. So in this clip, I'm demonstrating how you can use a 5mm Allen key to hold that center pin of the piston in place while you use a box open wrench, I believe it's a 19mm, to tighten down that top nut. And if you do it like this, you'll tighten that down, and at some point you'll feel that top nut bottom out. Well, having it just bottom out isn't enough. You really need to put some leverage on there and get that tightened down as tight as you can. While I was able to eliminate the groan by applying my considerable weight to these tools, you probably want to use tools more like these. Here I have a 12-inch breaker with a 5mm Allen socket, and then I have a pass-through ratchet and a 12-inch extender bar for leverage. And I don't have to tug on these anywhere near as hard as I had to tug on the smaller tools to get rid of that groan. So there I was at the end of 2021. I just gotten rid of the groaning and things seem to be working pretty well. So anyway, I thought it would be a good idea to review the things that we learned on this first part of my Raceland journey. So here I have one of my front coilovers, and I wanted to go over the configurations that are actually good configurations. So let's start with the early style top mounts or upper mounts. The early style upper mounts have a plastic bearing ring, right? And that bearing ring sits over that bulge right there. And then you need one of the top hats that comes with the Raceland kit. And whichever top hat you decide to use, you need this insulator. And you put that insulator on the spring side of the top hat. And this is the top hat that you use with the early style top mount. And it sits very nicely on that bearing ring. And then you take that whole assembly and you set it on the spring. You make sure that that spring is centered well on the top hat. Again, let's just take a look. See, we got the spring side of the top hat with the insulator. Goes down over the center shaft, and then the top nut holds everything together. And you have to remember, regardless of which upper mounts you're using, you want to get that top nut tight enough. It keeps the center shaft of the coilover from rotating when the entire coilover rotates. That nut is intended to hold that thing still while the coilover rotates. If you don't do that, you get the groan. So that's the early style upper mounts. Let's revisit the other style, the late style upper mounts, which happen to be the kind that Raceland sells. So let's take a look at that. So here is the Raceland style upper mount, which is also, I believe, the upper mounts that was used on the 05 and the 06's RSX Okay, now these upper mounts have the bearing ring. It looks like this. It's got the metal on one side and the plastic, or the rubber on the other side, and that rubber turns inside that metal bearing ring, and that whole bearing ring sits inside that upper mount. Okay, and then with that upper mount you use this top hat. Okay, and we can't use that top hat without the insulator. I'll take the insulator and I put it on the spring side of that top hat. Okay, and then I take that and I take that insulator and set it on the spring. And then the upper mount with the bearing ring sits on top of that top hat. Okay, and then same thing, the top nut goes on there, and you gotta make sure that's tight, otherwise you get that groaning. Yeah, I think that's it. Hopefully you're curious about what part 2 is all about, and you'll look for that video in the near future if it's not already out here.